how to use heavy cavalry or C1s and how he deploys a CC. So without further ado, Kat, please take it away.
Yes. Okay. I will be talking like Graham said about C1s, about how a different way to deploy CCs, especially in a role as an anti-infantry. So we're talking about mostly C1s, and I will talk about dragoons and stuff in a role more regarding to anti-infantry, because Wolf and Piotr have mostly been talking about D4s and cav against other cavalry. I will be trying to talk about more against infantry specifically. So here, let me pull up a replay real quick. Alright, so actually, no, I'm gonna switch over to Paint real quick first, and then I'll pull up the replay. So here is an alternative way, essentially, to deploy CC against infantry. This is not the more conventional way that most people deploy CCs, but this is how a lot of the this is how AMR and Buckenball, and by extension Fanagoria, have been deploying cav cores. The idea is to deploy the cav core as one cohesive unit. So instead of having like your allied infantry like this, and then having like one cavalry like in a gap here, and then more allied infantry like over here, and then another gap over here, where it's like you're very intermingled with your allies. This is how a lot of people deploy CCs. I'm going to be talking about an alternative way not to do this. The idea is to deploy the CC as one cohesive unit. So say you have like you have like six, say you have like 6 dragoons or something. You have like 6 cav deployed like this in formation, and then on either side, you have your infantry corps independent. So your CC is like independent in between 2 different infantry corps. This is to essentially give your space for your cav to cycle charge and act more like independent. So the CC player is playing in their own space to cycle charge and stuff, while their infantry players are on the sides to follow up. So you have an infantry corps here, then you would have your CC in between. The idea is for the infantry corps to apply pressure and essentially bend the enemy formation. To bend the enemy formation. So they're in a line. The idea is for the infantry corps. Give me a moment. The idea is for the infantry corps to push up and push the flanks to bend the enemy into essentially a sort of a V formation, or sort of like a convex formation, where they have some sort of weak point sticking out for the cav corps to hit. So yeah, that's the basic idea. You can also, like I said, for trying to keep CCs concentrated, you can also deploy on one side or sometimes both sides of an infantry corps. So you have deployed here, and then you'll have like the entirety of an infantry corps deployed. Deployed in between the 2 branches of a CC. Ideally, you don't want to leave both of your cav on complete opposite flanks for the actual engagement. But for initial engagements, it's fine to have it split like this. But once the major engagement happens, you want to try and bring all of your cav to mostly one flank, so you're not having to micro cav on multiple fronts, as if you're in like an intense micro fight, forcing squares, charging infantry, and coordinating with allies. It can be very hard to micro on multiple flanks. So the idea, you want to try and keep your cav concentrated for killing infantry. Yeah. So here, let me switch to the replay now. This is a heavy cav core game in sort of a similar way I was describing. So this is an 1812 Russian game. We have Ney deployed here, pushing into the town and pushing this flank. Then we have another corps Victor over here, who's pinning and going to be pushing this corps here. And then we have this heavy cav CC pretty much entirely on its own. There's a few of Ney's infantry nearby to break squares when needed. But the heavy cav CC essentially has this entire open field here to deploy on its own without it getting in the way of the other infantry corps, and not the infantry corps getting in the way of him. The idea of this is to clear up micro for the CC so they can use all of their space to cycle charge, especially large heavy cav units. The purpose of these like in between multiple infantry corps concentrated cav corps is to kill infantry with large amounts of larger, heavier cav units.
Kat, can I cut you out real quick? I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
You said cycle charge, and some of our members of the audience might not know what a cycle charge is.
Okay,
So...
you're right. Thank you. That's a very good
Yes.
point. Cycle charging is essentially, let me pull up Paint again. Cycle charging is essentially where you charge. No, that's the wrong button. Cycle charging is just charging your cav in and then pulling it back out quickly, and then charging back in again to essentially regain and use the charge bonus over and over again. Because cavalry deals the majority of its damage, generally speaking, on the charge with the impact of its weight and the boosted attack power. So cycle charging is just when you charge in with a cav, charge in, and then pretty much within like a second or two after your charge lit, so like your unit has stopped moving forwards and is now just engaging in melee, then you will pull it back out. And then you can either send in a new cavalry unit from a different spot to send it in, or you can cycle this unit back in. The idea is just to continue doing that over and over and charging in, letting the charge impact, letting the charge dissipate, getting the full weight and charge bonus value that's boosting your attack power, and then pulling back out again to do it again. This preserves cav models. It deals more damage quicker. It does use a lot of stamina, so this is generally something you can't do for like a super extended period of time without large amounts of cav. But like I said, so the entire goal of cycling is just to deal damage and not let your cav be worn down numbers wise. And on a larger scale, you want to try and like with CCs, with this kind of CC play that's in between multiple cores with your infantry pushing up on either side. The CC is essentially going to be cycling like several units. Like yeah, this is going to start taking place. This is not me playing the CC, because I'm not actually an incredibly good heavy cav CC player, but I do understand the mechanics of it very well, and I've played with many heavy cav CC players and seen how they do it. But yeah, this idea is you're forcing square, you're pushing up, you're pulling cav in and out to try and regain charge bonus. Like this unit is not going to square. So he's gonna get in, hit the charge bonus, hit the impact, and then pretty quickly, within like a second or two, he's going to pull back out of melee because he dealt the damage, he dealt the charge, and now he's pulling back out again. Um, the idea, like I said, is to and with C1s you want to spread as wide as possible. Because the idea with C1s is to get that charge impact, get that heavy damage, get the C1 weight, because that's where most of the C1's damage come from, is their weight and charge bonus. The idea when cycling in and out is to get the charge bonus, hit multiple units with it. That's why you spread you out. When fighting infantry, you want to try and spread your cav out as much as you have space for. And that's another reason for deploying a CC in a concentrated manner like this with infantry cores on the side. Is so that your cav player has enough space to charge in with these long, thin lines, hit multiple units, and then pull back out. Because if there was like an infantry core here, an infantry core here, then he wouldn't really have the space to do this. Whereas right here, he's able to hit these entire lines, and also he's also essentially pinning this entire army in place. Because his heavy cav is so large, and because heavy cav is very hard to kill, he is able to essentially pin an entire infantry corps in square with like he's taking losses for sure. But when you have 1,000 models of heavy cav, you can afford to take these losses. But yeah, the idea is to just keep pin in place. Your infantry cores are going to be pushing on the sides, while your heavy cav, or you can do this with dragoons to a lesser extent as well, is just continually going in, getting that charge bonus, ideally on as many units as possible, and then pulling back out again. So the idea of this is to just, I'm going to keep reiterating this, is to just continually deal that charge bonus where that's where cav does most of its damage. So when fighting infantry, like I said, you don't want to stay in melee for any extended period of time with cavalry most of the time. There are exceptions. Like if you're trying to pin some units in place, you can leave your cav in melee so you can push up more cav or infantry to hit the flanks and stuff. But outside of pinning, you want your cav, in my experience when fighting infantry, to continually be charging in and out because that's where most of its damage is dealt. Um, Another thing, um, when charging units you don't know for square with medium cav, but you want to like still make impact, something you can do is, and I'll pull up a battle example of this in a little bit, but what you can do is you can charge your unit and you can even give a right click order, give like an attack order on this unit. And then what I will do is while it's still charging and still moving, I will like essentially pre-fire an order while I'm like holding my mouse, holding my right click with the unit in like the line formation. And right before it makes impact, I will release the order. So the order goes through and the enemy, I'll still have like the front mauls of my cavalry hit and engage the unit, which still does damage. But if it squares, I will not take the full I will not get the bucking animation from my units bucking, my cavalry bucking, and I will take less damage from the square because of that, and because less of my unit is impacting the square. But it still makes contact with the enemy infantry unit and slows them down and deals damage. You can do this with heavy cav, light cav, medium cav, whatever. You do have to be careful about timing and stuff. Lag can greatly affect that. But yeah, and that's you saw the CC player doing that a couple of times. He'll go in with heavy cav, see if the enemy's about to square, and then pull off before the charge makes impact, so he takes less damage from the squares. And I'll show more examples later. So with heavy cav, with all cav, but especially with heavier cav, you want to give time for your unit to speed up on the charge so it gets the full impact. With light cav, it doesn't matter as much, and with dragoons, it matters to a lesser degree. With heavy cav, you really want that space, and you want at least like you want to be charging from at least here. Like you don't want to like anything closer than this, and you're not going to get full impact on these units if you were to charge right here, if that makes sense. And that's another reason why in this case, we had so much space here for the CC deploy. So they had lots of open space to get that full charge bonus up and then pull back out again. Like I said, this game is a good example of also like see this entire core is essentially pinned because of the threat of this heavy cap. Because if a significant amount of this unsquares for a significant amount of time, the heavy cap can just go right back in. And the heavy cap is not actually taking that much damage right now because these are just sitting in square. So you can actually essentially pin with cap, which sounds like odd and backwards, but is very possible by staying at long range, and the threat of the charge can keep stuff in the square, essentially. Yeah, the idea, like I said, this is to just have space for the CC. That's like the biggest thing. Is as someone who's played with CC, it can be very hard to micro clean charges and effective charges against infantry when you have infantry like on top of your cavalry. And so the way to deploy this is essentially a way to deploy cavalry where you have the space. It is primarily used against free, like I said, because the idea is here's a good example of heavy cavalry. It just completely bowled through these units, even though it still clicked on the units. This was a little bit of pull through. He should have pulled back here because this unit pulled back first, but um and that's what I'm talking about with the weight of C1s. They can just bowl through units when they get up to charge speed. Um, and I'm going to pull up another example here of core being deployed, like essentially in between two infantry cores.
Mind you, you have about 7 minutes left.
Okay, cool. In that case, I'm going to actually just show some stuff on the test map.
I mean, we can prolong it. We can prolong it if you know.
I think it's fine. I think I showed a good example of replay. I can show again afterwards, but I want to get in the test map to show some cavalry formations and stuff. Let me switch over to Marat. 1812 to get a good variety of cavalry. So I can show what I was talking about without clicking off a square before your charge makes impact. I just get progression. But yeah, like I was saying, so I'm just trying to really reiterate the point. Cavalry does the majority of its damage on the impact of charge because of the weight of cavalry and combined with the charge bonus and the attack. Because charge bonus multiplies the attack, and you combine the multiplied attack from the charge bonus and the weight of a cav is what deals the majority of the damage. So this kind of like anti-infantry CC gameplay, you really want to focus on getting that charge impact as much as possible and continuing to do that over and over again to break the enemy formation. That's another thing I will go into a little bit. The goal of CC in this case isn't always just to kill the enemy. So essentially, what I would say, break the enemy formation, which is to cause disorder, create a lack of cohesion, and create space for infantry corps to push up and take advantage of that. Because if the enemy is forced into square, their units are all jumbled from getting charged, and they're currently like, pulling out and shifting new stuff up to tank the cavalry charges. It means it gives space and time for your infantry corps to pull up and punish this disorder in their formations. But yeah, for like ideal charging width with like heavies and dragoons, ideally, like I said, you want to be in as thin as possible formation. Like 1 to 2 ranks is generally ideal if you have the space for it. And this goes for dragoons as well. Light cav varies. I'm not going to talk about light cav a whole lot, but the dragoons and heavy cav, this is C1 through C3 weight. You want to try and spread out the units to hit the charge as much as possible. And this is what I was saying for like charging units and then pulling out the square. So this is the AI, so I'm not expecting this to square, but I'm just showing like so. I'll get into range, I'll give the charge order off, and then I will hold down like this. I'll just hold this order here. And then once I get close, this unit's gonna get destroyed. I will click off. And that way I don't actually make impact. You can do it much later if you're trying to actually make contact. So let me do it with a heavy cav real quick. I'll give a charge order. And then I will hold it pre-fired here. And then once I can, with not like games, you want to do it very late. But you want to like right click right here, like right before the impact. So you still see how some of these units still went through the charge. And this will force the enemy that if it did square, if the enemy is capable of squaring and didn't, then they can no longer square because they're in melee. So you can pull out and charge in with another cavalry unit. But and if they did square, let me see if I can get the eye to square. If the enemy did square, then you pull off, you still do damage to the square, but most of your unit does not impact the square. It just gets in its face, it touches it, so that if the unit unforms square, you have models touching the square, so then it cannot re-square again. Yeah, this stuff should square. Yeah. And you just click off. The idea is to gain the impact. You don't want to do it as much with heavy cav. It's mostly for dragoons, since you will lose much of your super important impact on heavy cav, and you'll just get stuck in point blank and around like that. So it's definitely a tricky thing to use effectively. Takes a little bit of practice, but it's really good for as well, specifically pursuing armies when you don't know if they can square and you're just trying to slow them down. It's just click off early to get units engaged, get the unit to stop, square if it can square, while you're rushing up other infantry to shoot the square with pursuing infantry. I think that's everything I can think of at the moment. Yeah, but the idea
Still
with
have
this kind of,
three
I
minutes
still
left. Yep.
okay, cool. But yeah, like I said, the idea with this kind of CC, I'm gonna keep redoing this, is just to break up the enemy formation, mash units open with charge bonus, and pull back out again while you have MG cores pushing on each side. Um, you can obviously still use CCs in intermix with MC cores, and it's still very effective. But I have found when you're trying with larger, meat heavier, and dragoon CCs, it can be incredibly beneficial to have your CC deployed, like essentially entirely, and it's sort of like this, where it's entirely of its own. There's no infantry in the way, and you have infantry corps pushing up. Because even if the enemy squares, like we saw in that previous replay, the cav can just like stare at it from max range and not worry about it. Like it doesn't completely disable your cav, and you can just push elsewhere with your infantry there. And this allows you to pin entire corps in place with just cavalry, while your infantry corps push elsewhere. And if the enemy doesn't have a ton of squares, you can simply charge the units that don't square. And as long as you're careful and don't pull through, like say this unit here, right here, say these two units and they get a square. I can charge this unit in the center. As long as it doesn't pull back behind the squares, even if these two units form squares, it will still deal charge impact to the squares. But because I'm not clicked on like the actual squareable unit itself, then I will not get the rearing animation, and I will get less stat and morale debuffs from hitting the square. So once you have identified the squares, but the entire line isn't squareable, you can go back in. You can kill squareables with cavalry by essentially hitting units that don't square and hitting the squares with the unit at the same time. So let me switch to this again. So this. So what I'm saying is you can essentially, so you've got a line of infantry. You've got 2 units, and you've got 2 squares on the ends. Actually, let's do one line. So you've got a line here with squares on either side of it, and you want to try and kill these squares, but you only have cavalry nearby. So what you can do is, again, you can take your cavalry unit, spread it out wide, and then as long as this line isn't too far behind, as long as they're like in line and these units have just formed square, you can just charge this unit here, and you will still, because your cavalry is spread so wide, you'll still hit the squares and deal charge bonus to these squares and kill part of the squares, and then you can pull out because your cavalry will not get the bucking animation. And that's where the majority of losses, the instantaneous losses and morale debuff comes from hitting a square, is when you click on it and you get the rearing debuff. That's where most of the morale and model damage comes from first hitting a square. So if you can avoid that by hitting units that don't by clicking on units that don't square but still hitting the squares, is a good way to deal with squares. This is extremely effective with heavy cav, and is how you can kill entire armies with just cavalry, is by hitting the non-squares but still dealing damage to the squares, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the time is up. Any closing statements?
I don't think so. Like I said, this is not this is not the standard way most people like to play Cav. They like to either play it super wide on a flank, flanking around the enemy, or they like to play it super in a mix for their infantry. I'm just trying to offer like a quote unquote on a turtle of a different way to play that keeps your Cav concentrated, keeps you like in a cohesive unit, doesn't overstack micro as much, and allows you to deal lots of damage and even pen infantry corps in place with just cavalry, while your other infantry corps push up on the flanks. I was not able to find in the short time I had a good example of doing this with the Dragoon CC. Another time, if somebody wants to like talk to me like separately or privately, I would be happy to do this. Or if we have another lecture sometime, with more time, I'm happy to
We
provide that.
we if the considering the feedback we get from this lecture and how successful it is, and if people want to follow up, we can do one more in the future. Yes, that's
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So now, but
okay.
that's everything I said. I'm just gonna reiterate my
Okay.
final points. Charge
Okay.
bonus and impact of ways where you get most of your damage from. You want to cycle charge cav against infantry as much as possible. If you're fighting other cavalry, you can stay in melee and win that way. But when fighting infantry, you never want to leave your cav in melee for more than a few seconds, unless you're like what's called pinning with it, which is like I said, just holding it in place for other stuff to kill. If you're not doing that, you want to always pull out with your cavalry. It can use a lot of stamina, but it is worth it most of the time. Also, one nice thing I mentioned, when pulling out of melee with cavalry, if possible, if your unit's like starting to like redline and lose morale, walk it out of melee and don't run. Like instead of like running out of melee like this, you can just walk it out of melee. Because when you run with your back turned to the enemy, you get an even larger morale debuff. So if you just walk it out, you lose less morale when pulling out. So unless you really need to get it out in a hurry, you can oftentimes just walk cavalry out to lose less morale if you're
Okay,
worried about breaking
okay,
after pulling out.
okay. Thank you so much,
That's it.
but the time is
Yes.
we cannot stop the
I
march of time. So
yes.
that was Cat's election mainly concerning this how to use C1s, but I think he was it's his election is applicable to C3s as well. It's a little bit different to what the previous speakers have been talking about, which was mainly about the light cav. Now I would like to open the panel for questions. So if anybody has questions on the topic, if you can, for Cat, please, he's ready to answer.
Yes. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Still no question.
I mean, I have a question, but you kind of
Go ahead.
answered,
Go ahead.
but that replay, the heavy cap was going in like alone, like unsupported.
Yes.
But later you said it has to be like it's for breaking formations, and then infantry going in. But in that
Yes. Okay. That
replay, it
is.
wasn't good an example. It wasn't good example for that.
You're right. That replay was not a great example of the MG4 pulling off. But essentially, like the heavy cav was going alone, but the MG cav cores and there's other games that are better examples of this are still going in on the side.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
still pushing up on the side, and the idea is to break the formation of whatever is here, so that you can come in with infantry from the sides essentially,
Yes.
and
It's
come in
very
with infantry.
important. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
You can
okay.
you can change the size of this to deploy to fight. Like you can change how wide your cav is deployed depending on close enemy force to support. But yes, you're right. That is a little bit of a discrepancy. Is the cav is there
It's
to destroy formations, but the infantry is also not directly there. If that makes sense.
considering the time constraints and everything. I think the replay was of it illustrated the points quite well. At least what I have to say. Okay, more questions. Thank you so much, Migration, for the question.
Just asking about the cycle charge. Like, which one is a better tactic? Cycle charging or just have two units come from different directions at the unit?
So
I can
you're
answer
saying
that.
is
Wait,
yeah, go
wait,
ahead.
Cat, please
So
answer.
yeah, so you're talking about like, is it better to cycle charge from the front and go in and then go back out again, or is it better to charge from like here and then here at the same time? Is that your question?
Wait, I'm opening your stream. I didn't notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your question is it better to frontally charge to cycle charge like from the front with like a couple units, or is it better to simply with two units charge from different directions? Is that your question?
Yeah, like which one is better in this mode?
Generally speaking, hitting from multiple sides at once is going to be a lot more effective because it will force the unit to turn to face this way. If you charge a unit in this way, this unit will have to then face this way. And if you charge it again from the other side, ideally you want to do this slightly. Actually, it doesn't matter. You can do it simultaneously because then you're essentially hitting the rear of this unit right here if you're charging from multiple angles. So if you do have the space, charging from multiple angles at once is generally going to do more morale and model casualties. Cycle charging is when you don't have space. Is when you don't have space to hit the unit in the flank. If you can flank, you pretty much always want to flank because you do significantly more damage when you hit a unit on the flank. Cycle charging is for when the enemy is like in line like this, and you can't get around the sides. So when you can't get around the sides like this, that's when you want to go in and then pull back out again. It's for frontal charging specifically. Actually, it's just yeah. And then if you're going in from the rear, you still want to pull back out after you hit the charge, like after the impact goes in, after your cav's been in melee for like I said, it's about a second or two depending on context. Even when you charge in the rear, you still want to pull back out again so you can get that super powerful rear charge debuff and damage on them again. And even when you're charging from multiple directions like you described. So if they have a unit here and you charge it from multiple sides like this, and you don't break it as soon as these 2 impact charge, you do still want to like in fact cycle these units back out and do it again. It doesn't have to be from the front. Cycle charging is just charging in, and after the charge is displayed, pulling back out again, so you can go back in with either that same unit or another unit to gain the charge bonus again. If that makes
Just
sense.
asking, is there a reason to like pull them at the same time out, or let the other one wait? The other one can charge again into that
That's a
back.
good question. That's a good question. There's definitely variability to like charge in frontally and then pull back late so that the unit stays facing this direction, so that your unit in the back
Mhm.
can rear charge it again. So it really just depends on context and up to you. But yes, it is worth it to keep a unit in melee so that you can, instead of pulling it back again, keep the unit in like that melee animation in a broken up formation so that you can come back in and would charge it again. So yes, ideally, if you're charging a unit from multiple directions with multiple different units of cavalry, ideally yes, you would go in with one, leave it in melee, hit it while it's still in melee, charge the other one in, pull this one back while this one's still in melee, and then as this one's going in again, then you pull this one back out.
Mm.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Cool.
Okay,
Any
we
other
have time
questions?
for 2 more questions. So 2 more questions can be answered, please. Okay, if nobody has question, I can. I have one question.
Yes, please.
So considering like the what the gentleman before asked about which one to use, or flanking or front charge, would you say it's dependent? Like depends on the situation. There is no like one size fits everything. There's like situations where you use either
Yeah.
or.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes. All of this is mostly situational. There's not a one size fits all. There are times when you want to leave your cav in melee and times you don't. But most of the time, for dealing damage to infantry, you want to cycle charge. Generally speaking, when you have the option to charge the unit in the flank or frontally, you want to do it from the flank because it has less defense. It will take more morale damage, and it can't shoot you back while you're going in. So if you have an open flank to charge, you want to charge that. But if you don't, you can still charge it frontally, and you want to cycle it while charging frontally, so that you can continue to get that charge bonus, and you're not just taking the unit frontally continually.
Okay, thank you so much. We have room for one more question. One more question can be asked. The floor is open.
When you're cycling your cav, do you do damage to your own cav?
Like, will your cav take damage when it hits the enemy unit?
Like let's say you have another unit of cav coming behind to cycle it, and you're pulling that unit out, and that one goes forward, kind of hits it. Does it damage it?
You will take yes, charging your own units in the back will cause damage, and you can run over infantry with especially heavier cav units. So ideally, you want to be mostly clear. So say you go in with a cav unit, goes in like here, hits like here. Ideally, you don't want your other unit to overlap when it's going in. So like while this one's pulling out, ideally you want to hit only right here. Not only because it will damage your own cav, but also stacking cav units, like stacking units on top of each other is blobbing and is not against the rules. So ideally you don't want to have more than like a tiny bit of like anything more than like a small like this clipping like this is not a big deal. You're not going to get punished for this. It will still cause it'll make you lose charge impact right here because your units are getting stuck on this, and it can deal damage to this unit of cavalry right here. So ideally you want to not hit your own units as much as possible because it will do damage, and it is depending on how stacked it is against the rules.
Okay, hope that answered your question. That is all the questions for Kat. Thank you, Kat, so much for your lecture about C1s, and I think you've delivered a different perspective because the previous speakers have been mainly about C1s and about C4s and C5s and Lancers and calf to calf combat. Well, this was more focused on anti-infantry. Now, I would like you to, for every speaker has 1 minute of closing statement, and they can say whatever they want, whatever they have on their heart. So please, Bagration, the floor is yours. 1 minute closing statement.
I was not prepared for this, but maybe I can just repeat my points, I guess. In every game, in every calf against calf fight, you always want to gain advantage over your enemy. And the advantages I already told you. First is having your calf active or fresh. So don't use direct units. Always flank. Is flanking, and for flanking you need more calf, so you try to get in the position with more calf so you can flank. And one more thing is also important is having maybe general next to that fight when you see that it will happen. That way you win every calf fight, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Wolfie, please, 1 minute of closing statement. The floor is yours.
And he's not here.
I am. Well, I'm eating, so.
No.
That's crazy.
Let's finish shooting Wolf.
Right. Essentially, I don't really have any closing statements. I mean, essentially, like, C5s and C4s have different scouting ranges. C5s are quicker, you know. And essentially, like, I have this just similar. The rest of mine would just be similar points to Migrations. Always outflank and stuff like that. Always try and outflank. Always try and push your enemy into a corner. Always try and cut other armies off. Essentially.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Kat, closing statement, 1 minute, please. The floor is yours.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm just gonna reiterate my points. Cycle charging is where all of your cav does damage. You want to try and, whenever possible, to get that charge bonus over and over again as much as possible. Also, I don't know if I didn't go into super deep to this. Ideally, when using, especially your own cavalry, not in the context of a CC, you always want to try and have your infantry or somebody's infantry nearby to follow up. So one thing you can do is once you're going in, you're charging, cycle charging, and once you pull out again, one really effective strategy is to run up an infantry unit right up close to the unit you just charged so they aren't able to shoot, and deliver a point blank volley, and then sometimes melee the enemy. Because the enemy unit is unformed, they can't shoot, they just likely took a lot of casualties from the cavalry unit, and then you can deliver a close range volley. And yeah, cycle charging and roading up infantry while your cav is going in, especially when you're playing like with a single core, where you have your own infantry and your own cavalry, you really want to try and use your assets in tandem with each other. So go in with cav, then push up infantry, and then while the infantry's pushing up, go in with cav again, and just try and really support your own assets. Try and go in and out with your units, and sort of like leapfrog them or cycle units in and out to get really close to the enemy. This is not just for cav, this is in general. You want to try and use all of your assets in tandem, especially
Oh.
cavalry and infantry can do incredible damage if they're used together in that
Yes.
kind of manner.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Kat. That's the last closing statement. Okay. I would first and foremost like to thank our honored guests for coming and speaking. So, Mr. Piotr Bagration, yes, the best, the best CAF player currently playing. Yes, yes. Wolfie, the new generation who does things a little bit differently, but sort of similar. Thank you so much. And Kat, with his perspective on C1s and how to cycle charge and how to use cav against the infantry. So thank you so much as well. I would also like to thank everybody for attending. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope that you will attend further lectures as well. If you have any feedback or further questions or whatever, this lecture is going into like debate mode or whatever, you can just to do whatever you want after I'm done. Also, if you have, as I said, any kind of feedback, anything to improve, please DM me or write it into discussions or whatever. I'm gathering feedback, positive and negative as well. And that would be all for this lecture. Again, thank you so much and have a nice rest of your day, evening, whatever your time zone is. And yep, that's it.